Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Last week we would see the release of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R on Xbox and PlayStation consoles along with a Nintendo Switch. This remastered version of a fighter that had originally first seen release back in 2013 instantly caught my interest, as, after all, the JoJo fighting game that Capcom had created for their Capcom System 3 arcade board and Sega Dreamcast back in 1998 is still often fondly remembered as a cult favourite. In turn, this has inspired me to create a long boy of a video for you today, where we not only discuss this new JoJo offering, but take a trip back through time to build a decent understanding of the anime and the manga that this game was based off of, as well as look at the many forgotten JoJo games that preceded this latest release. There are far more layers to this tale than simply an iconic Dreamcast game and a newly published fighter. So join me as I take you all on a bizarre adventure as we look at this franchise's deep past. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R and everything that came before it. Yeah. Before JoJo's Bizarre Adventure was known for anything associated with video games, the franchise first came into existence as a manga series written and illustrated by Hirohiko Araki back in 1987. The plot that spans multiple series follows a different protagonist in each. However, each lead is a member of the Joestar family, whose mainline descendants possess a star-shaped birthmark above their left shoulder blade and a name that can be abbreviated to the titular JoJo. Basically, each series follows the protagonist's bizarre adventure. The first series, set in 19th century England, is known as the Phantom Blood Arc, and it follows Jonathan Joestar and his newly adopted brother Dio Brando. He loathes Jonathan and plans to usurp him as heir to the Joestar family, however is thwarted in his plans, so in an act of desperation uses an ancient stone mask to transform himself into a vampire. The series revolves around Jonathan trying to stop Dio achieving his new goal of world domination, which is achieved through using a martial arts technique known as Hammon that allows its users to focus bodily energy into sunlight via controlled breathing. The second arc, known as Battle Tendency, is set across both North America and Europe in 1938 and follows the life of Jonathan's grandson Joseph, who has a natural affinity for Hammon. Joseph and his allies in this series take on the Pillar Men, powerful humanoids whose race created the stone mask that turned Dio into a vampire. The Pillar Men must be stopped, so they are seeking the powerful red stone of Aja that would make them into ultimate beings. Now, that was the first two arcs, however as mentioned there are 8 in total, each focusing on a different generation of the same family. But it is Arc 3 which is most important in this video, and perhaps the JoJo franchise overall, as this would be the series that would spawn its own 1993 animated TV show, and soon after, lots of video games. You see, the third series is set in 1989 and follows Japanese high school student Jotaro Kujo, which instantly explains why this was made the starting point of both the game and the anime. Basically, it seems in Japan that if characters are made to be Japanese high school students, franchises start printing money. Just look at the Persona series for example, after they made Shin Megami Tensei game in a high school setting, or Sailor Bloody Moon. People seem to love this sort of thing. The story follows Jotaro, who has developed a supernatural ability known as a stand. Approached by his grandfather, Joseph Joestar, Jotaro learns that this power is the result of the influence of his sworn enemy of the Joestar family, the vampire discussed earlier known as Dio. Jotaro's mother's life is put in danger when she starts developing a stand that she can't control. Jotaro and Joseph go on a quest to destroy Dio so they can cure her. Likely to accompany the anime and expand the JoJo media franchise into more areas, 1993 would also be the same year that Japan would get the first ever JoJo's Bizarre Adventure video game, but it had nothing to do with fighting games quite yet. Instead, being created to appeal to the Japanese public, the first JoJo title would be developed as a role-playing game that would carry the simple title of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. In this title, that was developed by Winkysoft and published by Cobra Team, players would take control of the Star Crusaders as they navigate this quirky world. Gameplay-wise, the title would combine third-person RPG gameplay and mixed up with point-and-click elements, delivering something quite different from the average Super Nintendo game that would have been popular in the West at the time. The game also has its own turn-based battle system, which in itself has its own unique quirks to it. For example, prior to each encounter, players choose a face-down card and their character's abilities will differ depending on which one they picked. Like in most RPGs, players can select attacks to do damage, use items for buffs and recoveries, but in addition to this, players can also choose to talk to opponents, using lines that appeared previously in the anime. The purpose of this is to demoralize enemies, reducing their stats. There are also a few further options, but nothing particularly out of the ordinary. Looking at the genre of this game and the fact that it was based off of an anime, it is no surprise really that this title never left Japan. While the language barrier and lack of release may have stopped Western gamers from enjoying this one at the time, thankfully a fan translation of the game has now been made available. Meaning, if you want to give this one a shot, the option is now there. So past this point, while the JoJo manga will continue to be published, fans on the video game side of things would have to wait another 5 years before they would get a new title from this franchise. But my god, did this wait turn out to be worth it? In the past on this channel we have often discussed the Street Fighter III trilogy of games. Street Fighter III was developed to run on the powerful Capcom System 3 arcade board, a board that allowed Street Fighter III to contain so many animation frames within its character movements that when the game was released in arcades in 1997, the Sega Saturn, PlayStation and Nintendo 64 would not be able to handle the experience, meaning that Capcom had to wait for the release of the first console from the next generation. Speaking of Capcom System 3 games, the hardware also featured another game that we have looked at before on this channel, known as Red Earth. This high quality fantasy themed fighting game was the very first to be released for the System 3 as early as 1996, which meant Capcom never even got round to bothering trying to port this one. Well, until 26 years later of course anyway, when it was released as part of the Capcom Fighting Collection in June of 2022. But as for the CPS-3, the System 3 board was not great hardware to program games for that would be easy to port to home systems of the era. The two most successful consoles of the time, the Sony PlayStation and Nintendo 64, were both geared towards delivering polygon-based experiences, rather than games featuring state-of-the-art sprite animation. Meaning that after Red Earth and the Street Fighter 3s, Capcom would only ever bother making one more game for the arcade board, which is of course JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the very subject of this bloody video. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure was sandwiched in between the release of Street Fighter 3 Second Impact and Third Strike, with, as mentioned previously, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure being developed by the Street Fighter 3 team. The game would transpire to be the perfect property for Capcom to use when creating a fighting game, as the company already had a great deal of experience creating games featuring an anime art style, such as Street Fighter Alpha and the Darkstalker series for example. This meant that using Hirohiko Araki's colourful characters, Capcom were able to develop a visually detailed game which was highly stylised. As for the artwork and the gameplay found in this title, to help remain faithful to the source material, Araki would work on the game as a consultant, advising Capcom's employees on decisions, and even creating exclusive pieces of artwork for its promotion and packaging. Most notably, he even developed from scratch a new character design for one particular character known as Midler, since Capcom were interested in using her in the game, and she had only been shown from the waist down in the original manga. In regards to this cult classic, as mentioned, it first debuted in the arcades in December of 1998, but would become the final Capcom System 3 release when a revised version of the game was released after Street Fighter 3 First Strike, in September of 1999, known as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Heritage for the Future, which expanded the game by 8 characters, bringing a total roster selection of 22 fighters to the game's lineup. Seasoned fans of Capcom fighting games will instantly recognise that the title has much in common with its predecessors, in that the game consists of matches between 2 fighters in combat, using a variety of attacks, techniques and special moves in order to deplete their opponent's health bars to achieve victory. The game also includes its own variant of the super move system, allowing fighters to use character-specific special moves. The game's most unique feature, that falls perfectly in line with the game's manga and anime relatives, are the character's ability to use stands in matches, basically powerful projections of fighters' energy, with each one being unique to each fighter in the game. The stands are generally integrated into each character's moveset. However, most characters also possess an active stand, which can be brought both into and out of battle using the stand button. When stands are active, this gives fighters the ability to perform more powerful moves, use special techniques, and even gain special abilities such as the power to be able to double jump. Stands can even sometimes be used to attack separately from their accompanied fighter. Despite stands having their advantages, a great deal of strategy is required to get the best out of them, as they still have their limitations. For example, if a stand is attacked, the accompanying fighter still takes damage, and stands are only available to use if there is energy present in the stand gauge. Further layers of strategy are added by picking moments of when to call on these stands, as gauges refill slowly when a stand is withdrawn. In fact, if the gauge runs out while a stand is in use, fighters are temporarily stunned and vulnerable to oncoming attacks, so using them right is of the utmost importance. There are scenarios when stands clash against each other, when fighters must mash buttons to overcome their opponent. A feature we have seen previously in other fighting games, and extensive combos can be performed when players combine their own attacks with their stands. Like Street Fighter 3 and its iterations, it is no surprise that this game would see a release on the Sega Dreamcast at home. The disc would contain both the original arcade version of the game, along with the revised version of the title too, pretty much letting gamers earn a definitive arcade copy of this title as soon as the game made it home. When playing this title, players can opt for either a challenge mode, which offers a classic arcade fighting experience, or a full-blown story mode. IGN would be thoroughly impressed with the Dreamcast release, stating, "Street Fighter in Dimension X, Marvel vs Capcom without a tag team, Darkstalkers on acid. However you try to describe the strange Capcom fighter known as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, one thing is for sure, you'll never find anything else quite like it." They would surmise with the best way to describe JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is that it's a strange and entertaining jaunt into the realm of fighting. If an attempt at something different while keeping the true spirit of Capcom fighting is what you're looking for, then JoJo is for you. Have fun. GameSpot would praise the Dreamcast version of this game, as in their own words, it offers fine-tuned Capcom quality with a twist, along with a unique storyline and great control. They would add that, although most American gamers won't be able to appreciate the subtleties of the storyline and their relation to the manga that spawned it, as much as their Japanese counterparts might, there is certainly enough dialogue included in the intermittent cutscenes to give you an idea of what's going on. They would conclude that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is accessible to both newbies and hardcore gamers alike, which alone is worth its weight in gold. The graphics are as cool as the story, this one is a must for every fighting game fan's library. Now, something else that is worth mentioning with regards to this game is that the Sega Dreamcast would not be the only home console this game would be ported to back in the day, as insanely, they somehow managed to port this title to the incredibly underpowered Sony PlayStation. This was the only time in history a Capcom System 3 game would make it over to the basic hardware, so how did it handle this game and what changes were made? Let's take a look. Rather than featuring both arcade versions of the game like its Dreamcast counterpart, the Sony PlayStation version of the title would instead be based on the original incarnation of the game, but have the 8 characters added to the lineup from the enhanced iteration. An exclusive Super Story mode was even added too, which covers the entire Stardust Crusaders story arc. But how did all of this pan out for Capcom? Well, when it was first announced that the game was coming to the PlayStation, by this point in time fans were expecting the worst. They had seen what happened to the likes of X-Men vs Street Fighter when it was ported over to the system, so people were doubtful that JoJo could be programmed to run on the system well. GameSpot would welcomely report though that JoJo on the PlayStation was extremely playable, topping even the porting of Street Fighter Alpha 3 to the platform. They said Bizarre Adventure retains the arcade version's speed and playability, if not all of the animation, though some frames of animation appear to have been left on the cutting room floor. If you haven't played the arcade version, you will never notice. Bizarre Adventure plays fast and controls great, even with the PlayStation's controller. The PlayStation version, in my opinion, does not look quite as good as what could be found on the Dreamcast, or in the arcades, but the game looks extremely decent for a title that ran on such weak and feeble hardware. Capcom really did work out how to get the best out of the thing by the end of the platform's lifespan, despite many of the difficulties they had faced within its early PlayStation days. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure would be the most successful arcade game in Japan in 1999, becoming a bestseller, shifting over 300,000 units across the country. So the game certainly achieved a lot more success in some corners of the world than others. But all sales figures and statistics aside, this is still a beautiful little fighting game that brings something a bit different to the table, utilising the underused Capcom System 3 hardware. But while this game functions as what most people would consider the crown jewel in the JoJo gaming series, the JoJo gaming story was obviously far from over yet. A HD version of a classic fighter would be made available to download on the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade service in 2012, but in the years leading to this, a couple more JoJo options had come to the market too. The first of these was a 2002 game that was released exclusively in Japan for the Sony PlayStation 2, known as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Just like previously, this was yet another title that had been both developed and published by Capcom. But this time the direction was taken away from fighting games. 2002 was an era whereby fighting games were cooling down a bit, with Capcom looking to focus more efforts on other genres. As for this one, it was based on the manga's fifth arc known as Golden Wind, resulting in a video game whereby gamers got to control characters from said manga arc as they fight enemies in 3D environments within this action-adventure title. Capcom would opt for a cel-shaded graphical style with this one, and Araki's art was featured within the game once more. Of course, in combat, the spirit-like stand characters that can be released from players' characters' bodies also play a role. Interestingly, at one point this game was planned to see a European and North American release, with the game being made available to play for the public at Western Expos and being talked about at E3 2002. Sadly, for whatever reason though, localised versions of the game were cancelled. The game would get a lot of praise from Western journalists at the time, who were impressed with the title's gorgeous visuals. However, few would be impressed with the gameplay itself, leading me to believe we likely did not miss out on all that much in the first place. The next JoJo game would be yet another Japanese exclusive, with this one servicing in 2006. This next effort would not be developed nor published by Capcom, but instead published by Bandai, with the game development being handled by Anchor Inc. This title, subtitled The Phantom Blood, was released to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the franchise, and in a rather surprising twist would be programmed as a 3D beat-em-up. Yes, that's right, years after the likes of the Fighting Force games and the Die Hard arcades, Anchor Inc. would choose to have another bash at this genre. This experience is divided into chapters whereby, as the story progresses, action takes place in free roaming arenas. Your playable character has what is known as a heat gauge that in many ways functions like a fighting game combo meter, meaning that when filled, more devastating attacks become possible. The main event of the title is the game's story mode, which follows the entire manga's timeline's history step by step. There are lots of cutscenes and voice acting to aid with this, with in total, cutscenes themselves eating up 70% of the playtime. The fan service for long-time fans of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure doesn't stop there though, as there is a museum mode full of all sorts of additional content. This certainly looks like a bizarre adventure. The next JoJo game would be a significant one, as it would be the first game from the franchise to see a global release since the fighting game that had previously been created by Capcom. 2013 would see the release of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle, the original incarnation of the fighting game that saw a remastered edition unleashed on the world only last week. Published by Namco Bandai Games and developed by CyberConnect 2, the game was first released for the Sony PlayStation 3. Taking place across the first 8 arcs from the manga, players can take control of various classic characters from the franchise and duke it out across many memorable locations from the Japanese comic source material. Containing a choice of 41 different characters to choose from when we include the DLC, All-Star Battle delivers a satisfying 3D fighting game that is brimming with tons of personality. Gameplay utilises a traditional fighting game light, medium and heavy attack system, with dodges also being executable. In addition to this, there is also a style button that utilises different special abilities such as augmented additional strength for attacks. Further to all of this, as expected, characters who can summon stands in the manga and anime can also do so in this game. Like the 2006 beat-em-up, characters in this game once again possess heat gauges, which as expected function like combo meters. Amongst the layered gameplay, combos can be chained together, combos can be stopped using flash cancels, and taunts can be used to lower enemies' heat gauges. There are also echoes within the game back to Capcom's 1998 classic, such as Rush Mode, which functions similar to that game's blazing fist smash system, basically when two attacks collide leading to a button mashing minigame. When characters' health is severely depleted, they enter what is known as Rumble Mode, that in desperation can help turn the tide via their adrenaline, leading to greater strength and other increased buffs. There are a lot of different fighting game mechanics present, which can all be utilised across the game's various modes of play. These include Story Mode, which covers the 8 parts of the manga mentioned earlier, with the various scenes from the publications being recreated for the game. The game also presents what is known as Campaign Mode, which is played online whereby gamers can unlock custom medals and more. This involves fighting visions of computer opponents and even boss characters, with as players build their campaign score, more features of the game being unlocked. There is also a versus mode for both local and online play, a gallery mode, a gallery shop and much more. There was certainly a decent amount of content here. The game was received well by many critics, with many commenting that even though not many Westerners will have been particularly familiar with the manga or the anime, the gameplay and graphics in this one are captivating enough to capture audiences' attention on their own merits, even if mechanically it is not one of the greatest fighting games ever created. IGN, for example, would summarise JoJo's exhibits a flagrant disregard for rules, both visual and mechanical, and for that I truly love it. It can at times seem completely alien and imbalanced, but even then it manages such consummate showmanship. It's difficult to fault it too harshly. It is by no means a comprehensive or polished fighting game, but it is a uniquely enjoyable one, exhibiting rare style and creativity in battle, even as it struggles to meet the standards set by other modern fighters. GameSpot, on the other hand, were not quite as impressed with this one, comparing this title with the Capcom classics from the 90s. They would write, "For those of you out there who are JoJo's fans first and fighters second, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle is, despite its flaws, still very fun to play. The game is a fantastic vehicle for recreating the iconic scenes and matchups from its source material. It is easy to pick up and mash out combos, and is every bit as stylish and emotive as the original manga. But once the glitz and the glamour fade and you dive a little deeper into this game, the cracks begin to show. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle is packed with style, but simply lacks the substance to back it up." Destructoid would be more positive in their outlook, commenting, "JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle is a colourful spectacle that both fans of the anime and future fans of the anime will want to pick up and experience, even if just to watch a man use only his upper body strength after hopping off his horse to hold his own in combat. It's funky, gorgeous and oozing with style. And where it comes up short, it simultaneously delivers in terms of fan service and content. You won't be putting it down for quite some time." Personally, while I don't feel this game is quite as inspiring as the Dreamcast offering, it was still a very decent effort that has a lot of flavour to it. But this was all the way back in 2013, so what would occur for the franchise on the gaming front over the last 9 years? 2014 would see the release of yet another JoJo game, this one not quite as exciting though, as what saw released previously. The game I am referring to is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Shooters, a mobile game released for iOS and Android. Like most mobile games, it utilises a touchscreen. This title, developed by Joy-Con, allows players to input commands using their fingers. The game is a bit like a card battler game, only players use medals. I don't feel this one is particularly interesting, so let's just swiftly move on. 2015 would see the franchise return to home consoles with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Eyes of Heaven, which, like the previous console game, was developed by CyberConnect 2 and published by Bandai Namco. Released for PS3 and PS4, this 3D action brawler with tag team elements has a sort of Power Stone sort of vibe to it. Apparently there are other Shonen Jump game series that feature gameplay like this, such as the Naruto Ultimate Ninja series, with similar combo mechanisms and air-to-air combos being present throughout all of these games. This one wasn't as critically well received as All-Star Battle, ultimately getting a score of 61% over on Metacritic. GameSpot would criticise the game for what they refer to as a dull story mode, unstable online play, and a complete lack of local multiplayer modes. IGN Spain, on the other hand, were a bit more impressed, awarding the game 7.5 out of 10. They would summarise, if you're a fan of this license, it is an almost mandatory title, although you should know that it flees from the traditional combat system in the fighting genre to offer something more open and frenetic. This makes it lose some playable depth, but it makes up for it with an almost endless repertoire of characters and possibilities. It's not perfect since it doesn't kill visually, though it doesn't need to either, and it misses obvious opportunities that have made an even bigger mark. If you are not a fan of a series, you will find a title with a unique aesthetic, although you may not know even half of a function. As we move through time, we arrive in 2017 with the release of yet another JoJo mobile game. In this instance, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Diamond Records. This one is a weird 3D action game made up of the first 5 parts of the manga series, and it involves players using a team of characters and their stand abilities to take part in quests built around the main series story. The game is free to play but has a lot of greedy microtransaction laden gacha mechanics, encouraging players to essentially try and play to win. Dirty, dirty. This dubious entry in the series would receive an update and subtitle change in 2018, leading to the game being known as Diamond Records Reversal. But I don't want to talk about this game any more than I need to. 2018 would also see the release of the mobile game known as JoJo's Patapop, which is possibly the most Japanese iOS and Android game ever made. This one features super deformed, chibified characters with gameplay consisting of 2D tile matching. The game was well received upon release, with many players commenting on the cute visuals and easy to learn gameplay. Despite only being officially released in Japanese, the game gained a niche but devoted following in the West, with many guides and translation communities forming. The game reached 1 million active players on August 28, 2020, so there was a surprisingly large audience for this one. In 2017, JoJo would return to the realm of Japanese arcades, with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Last Survivor. This one would function as a third-person battle royale action game. Personally, if I was in charge of naming this title, that supports up to 20 players in a single match, I would have just gone with the name JoJo's Bizarre Fortnite. But hey, what do I know? After being deployed randomly on a map, players use their attacks and stand abilities to become, well, the last man standing. It is what it is. This at last brings us around to the newest JoJo game that only saw release last week, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R, a new iteration of All-Star Battle that not only runs on all modern hardware, but also includes a number of bells and whistles the previously already decent original game did not. Changes to the classic gameplay have been added, such as a new mechanic known as support attacks. This lets players summon a second fighter during combat, essentially allowing for assault assists. By doing so, it is possible to chain combos together for longer, break opponents' combos through reversal assists, and more. Further to this, a function that is known as stylish guards has been added, which allows players to buffer against a stylish evade. How stylish! Not only that, but 10 additional characters have been added to this remaster, bringing the roster count up to 51. Further to this, 4 more characters are set to be added too, via the post-launch season pass. Adding to all of this, the game also included improved frame rate, improved game speed, added hit stops to make the game feel smoother, added input buffers resulting in better control, added dash jumps, new special move commands, and attacks have been adjusted to further balance the game. All in all, it's the same game that was released back in 2013, but with loads of extra characters and a ton of more refinement. Surprisingly, much of the mainstream gaming media appear to be ignoring the release of this game, so I can't even tell you what the likes of IGN and GameSpot think of it, since they've not bothered to cover it. The biggest publications to bother tackling reviews of this one were the Mako Reactor and Nintendo Life. However, both of these sources would focus on the Switch port, rather than the versions available on much more powerful hardware. The Mako Reactor would commend the game's quality, awarding the port 75%, but criticise the game's current online stability. They would summarise with, if you're after a content-packed anime fighter, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R is well worth your time. Nintendo Life on the other hand would write, it would be a hard game to recommend to someone unfamiliar with the franchise, as without the fan service aspect, you're left with a basic fighter with some bare-bone modes. However, for those who adore JoJo, it's an excellent example of how to do fan service right, and one where you can feel the love and adoration of the franchise's 35-year history flowing through every part of the package. Digging a little deeper, it seems that the Italian internet seems to be giving this game more attention than the English one, with a Games Machine giving All-Star Battle R a stunning review, concluding we would have preferred a proper sequel, but the gigantic roster gives JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R that encyclopedic value that will keep Araki's fans busy for a long time. The partly revamped audio-visual presentation still holds up well against the weight of years, and variety of characters is put at the service of a sufficiently complex and satisfying combat system. All in all, I feel JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R serves as a great love letter to the franchise, packed to the brim with characters and scenery that celebrate this franchise's rich past. It may not necessarily be the greatest fighting game ever published, but it is certainly one with a lot of charm. Looking back at the JoJo brand's past today, I hope I was able to further open your eyes up to how big a deal JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is over in Japan, with the series actually getting far more video game entries than I possibly imagined. You thought this video was over, but there are more games featuring Dio! Well, kind of at least, as the character was created to pay homage to this memorable villain, who would go on to appear in several SNK games. This fighter would first pop up way back in 1993 as the final boss of World Heroes 2. Players would have to prove themselves against Dio to prove they are the strongest in history. It would appear though that this was not Dio's final form, as he would show up again 2 years later in World Heroes Perfect in an all new golden form, taking the name Neo-Dio, an awesome play on words and one of which translates to New God. Neo-Dio would disappear for an entire decade, but would return once more in the NeoGeo Battle Coliseum as a possible final boss. In NeoGeo Battle Coliseum, his lines were changed to reference Santana, an antagonist from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2 Battle Tendency. For one final hurrah, Neo-Dio would be back once again within the Nintendo DS game SNK vs Capcom Card Fighters DS. All in all, it must be said that while this character is a parody, these video game appearances further reinforce the JoJo franchise's significance. While before making this video I was more than familiar with the Capcom classic from 1998, I was not aware that there were so many other quirky offerings out there, so I enjoyed sharing those with you all. Overall, I hope you enjoyed this long boy of an episode, taking a deep dive look at a franchise I did not know a great deal about previously. If you enjoyed this upload and want me to look at another fighting game related series, be sure to comment which one you think I should cover down below. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R and all of the other JoJo games. Make sure you like this video, subscribe and ring that notification bell, as I would love to see you back here next time I upload. Ridiculous long videos like this that may very well end up failing are in part made possible due to the lovely group of people who support this channel over on Patreon. Speaking of whom, special thank yous go out to Ben Harradine, Carl Johnson, Heo Paulo Lopez, Johnny Holly, Koryai Marshina, Ron Dinch, Evan Border, Azurakai, Ego, Jordan Duran, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Matthew Langtree, Matt Fowl, Steve, Justin Wang, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Sang He, Langston Miller, Vladimir Renee, TOG Driver, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Ball, Antonio Rodriguez, Since Spaces, Punk Toast, and of course everybody else who chooses to back my work on the Patreon platform. Thank you so much for helping me do this. Yeah. Cheerio.